Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev. Well, the 40th Ludum Dare game jam wrapped up recently, and the theme Deeper and Deeper actually got my creative juices running. So we're gonna start work on a game inspired by the theme of Deeper and Deeper. Our goal will be to create a game about exploring an infinitely deep and randomly generated cavern. The cavern will be filled with monsters which the player will have to avoid or fight back with using their flashlight. I hope to add a few other features to the experience, but first we need to get the basics done. So without further ado, let's get to the coding. And before recording, I created a new project comprised of various bits of code from previous projects, the lighting/darkness from projects like Fast Minute, and the random generation from previous attempts at, well, random generation. So the first thing we needed to do was create the difficulty scaling. Using a global variable to keep track of difficulty, some basic math was used to determine the increase in cavern size based on a threshold of 3, meaning every 3 levels the game would get harder in various ways. Then I realized I was defining the global variable every time the room was loaded, so the variable was moved to the game start event, which was met with an error when testing. It took me at least 10 minutes of fiddling to realize apparently defining global variables in the game start event no longer works like it used to, and even placing the event in a starter room/object before loading the actual play room itself resulted in the same error. The global variable had to be defined in the create event of the starter object in order for GameMaker to recognize it. But with that figured out, the difficulty could be increased and the potential for larger, more complicated cavern layouts would increase with it. That is until I hit level 6, where the game would continuously lock up, as if loading a lot of data, and profiling via debugger showed that some random GameMaker array code was seriously freaking out on any level beyond 6. After at least another 10 minutes of fiddling, it was discovered that a temporary DS list generated for spawning purposes was to blame. Removing this chunk of code allowed the difficulty to count up without a hitch. And once again, I have absolutely no idea why this was a problem to begin with. However, with this figured out meant we could now move on to our next task. The darkness alpha was up next, which would slowly get more opaque over time. Using similar math and a bunch of tweaking to the numbers, I eventually had the darkness become more prominent the deeper the player traveled, eventually leaving our lone wanderer in complete darkness. However, the increase in darkness felt a little too abrupt, so the darkness alpha was made global, and once again, using some simple math, the darkness was slowly applied over time. This provided a far less jarring ease into the next level of darkness as the player descends. So with that all working, the global script was updated with 2 new functions. The first was a reset function that, well, resets the difficulty and alpha back to their default zeros. The other function would be the progress function, which would increase the game's difficulty. The progress function was then tied to the collision between player and the exit ladder, thus completing the base level of our gameplay loop. And so with our base done, it was time to add some spice. A motion grid was created and wall tiles were added to contain our new enemy units to the cavernous flooring. Then in our new enemy object, a path timer was added, and in the step event, if within range of the player, the enemy would have its pathing updated, then initiated to chase down the player. Next, back in the spawn code, every floor tile was then given a chance to spawn an enemy unit. And, oh sweet Jesus, that was the wrong tile type. One tweak later and, well, the results were just as terrifying. Now, despite the horrifying numbers, for now it was back to the code for more tweaking. In the enemy code, a view direction variable was added, and similar to the pathing, the view angle would change based on a timer. This would simulate the enemy looking around, and somehow the temporary lines drawn to display the line of sight made the enemies look even scarier. But it worked, so back in the enemy code, to make things fair, instead of a vision cone, the enemy would need direct line of sight via collision line. This did not end up working as I thought it would, and adding even more math plus an angle difference check as a shortcut provided less than ideal results. Sadly, I was running out of time for this session, so I opted to come back to this later. The enemy spawn chances were then tied to the difficulty. And finally, to end on a positive, I had the player's arm twirl around based on the mouse's position. And that wrapped it up for this session. It was actually a really good place to end, because after attempting to create a vision mechanic for the monster, I realized it made more sense for them to be audio based, you know, like a bat. It would also make the player's inevitable way to fight back much more logical, which we'll get to in a future episode. In fact, there are many elements I'm looking forward to adding in this one. But you know how it goes, so much to do, so little time. So we'll have to pick this one up again next time, because we've come to the end of today's episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and be sure to leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.